Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Beyond the Hire podcast, where we dive into recruiting for the go to market space, what it takes to build winning teams, and how industry leaders got to where they are today. My name is Sandra, and I'm the VP of Revenue here at Bets. Today, I'm joined by Jay Madheswaran. He's the founder and CEO of Eve. He has over 15 years of experience in AI and machine learning at places like Facebook, Rubrik. Prior to founding Eve, Jay was with Lightspeed Venture Partners. Quite the CV. So thank you for joining us, Jay. Very excited you're here.
Thank you for having me on, Sandra. Excited to be here.
My pleasure. Fun fact for those who don't know, Eve has actually made, I think, 40 plus hires through Bets. So, a very fruitful partnership. So, we know a lot about Eve. But for those who don't and are listening to the podcast today, would you mind explaining a little bit about what Eve is, what Eve does, and kind of what the product is?
Eve is legal AI for plaintiff law. So, plaintiff law is the type of law where consumers, so most likely you and I, when you're not working in a company, when you need access to a lawyer, we just don't have the money to spend $700, $800 an hour for a lawyer. So, what plaintiff lawyers do is they effectively take on your case and then take a percentage of the case when they eventually win for you or settle. So, we help them qualify clients, kind of work through that case end to end, and never really have to make compromises on quality. So, like a $5,000 case client is going to get the same quality of work as a $1 million case client. And that is kind of like the first area where I think AI is really, really impactful, where it's not just saving time and bringing efficiencies, but it's actually enabling a quality of service that never was possible before.
Amazing. I've read a lot about Eve, but let's kind of take a step back before we get into Eve because you've had a very interesting career. You were a software engineer when you first got started at a few different places, but obviously most notably at Facebook. Talk to me, what did you study in college? And did you always know you kind of wanted to go into this direction?
I was a very undecided kid in college, actually. So when I joined, I was in chemical engineering, and then I switched to bio, and then I switched to computer engineering, and finally computer science. So pretty much sampled all the sciences before making the final call. And the thing that really attracted to me about computer science, this was back in the day, I suppose, 2008, where computer science and software was still taking off. Microsoft was the big company at the time, and tech companies were just getting off the starting block at the Silicon Valley. And I just saw how fast it was to innovate, and I just kind of fell in love with that. And I really, really enjoyed building, and that's what I focused on. So my career kind of led me down building different things over time, really all across the stack. I was a high frequency trader working on kind of the most nitty gritty performance related problems. At Facebook, I kind of built the early stages of Facebook groups and kind of got it to 500 million users, as well as many ads related products. And then Rubrik joined as a first engineer and kind of built the security behemoth it's become now over the last, whatever it was, 14 years. And then now with Eve, really reimagining how law works has been the most interesting challenge so far, and also the fastest paced, even compared to all the different places I've worked.
It's really fascinating because obviously you started your career as a software engineer. I mean, back in, the earlier 2000s, like 2009, 2010. Did you really know what you were getting into then when you were making these decisions? Like, were you getting into it? I mean, I think we all knew, being all similar ish ages, that like, are we in it for, we think we're well compensated in these roles, or we make a difference in these roles, or like there's a lot of room for growth in these roles? What was the main driver for you to kind of go into that direction? Or was anyone kind of in your family doing something similar?
It really wasn't. My very first internship, I think I was making $12 an hour
Ah,
at a
yes.
CS job. And I genuinely considered that versus McDonald's, which was like $7 an hour. So it was going to be like less work and less travel at the time. That's kind of where I started. So it wasn't just the money. Obviously, that came later as you join somewhere early, like Facebook, it just helps. But what really attracted me was just the building. And I can't stress this enough. Like, this is why I even left high frequency trading, which also pays very well,
Hmm.
to actually take a pay cut to join Facebook at the time, largely because I fell in love with creating something that people would use that has a tangible impact I can see and feel within my lifetime, ideally. And all of that was really important to me. And that's ultimately what made me fall in love with it. And once I started, I knew I wasn't really leaving.
Yeah, absolutely. I love so for you, it's kinda your career has been mostly passion-based, it sounds like?
I think it's passion and learning based. Every job I took, it was for both because I really enjoyed potentially the product you're going to build, but more equally important is what I was learning. While I was at Facebook, I'd actually tried to start a company while working there somehow. And that was a really formative experience because we had gotten waitlisted or something from YC. But just the experience of that was really infectious. And I learned a lot about the skill sets I was missing and what it really takes to found a company one day. That was kind of the back of my head as I joined Rubrik as an investor in Lightspeed. I think there's always some appeal behind starting something from scratch, kind of being taking on the world by itself without any structure around you. There's something both daunting and appealing about it. And I kind of structured my choices to make me capable of doing that if I wanted to or if I needed to.
That's really nice. So we have listeners who are people early in their career, even some people who are still in university, as well as some wonderful hiring managers. But for those who are maybe still in university, obviously they come to us for their first jobs or, figuring out how to get hired. How did you get your first real job out of university?
Yeah, it depends. So it changes from time to time. I think the hardest thing when you're in college is you have no priors to rely on. So you do whatever you can to make that work. My very first job I had gotten was at a Fortune 500 company for an internship.
How old were you when you started college?
I think I was 16 when I started college. I skipped 2 grades in high school, so I ended up joining college a little bit early.
I'm just now so curious. What is it like to join to be there with 18-year-olds when you are only 16? That's a big age gap at that time in your life.
Not too much of an age gap, honestly. It's all about the same. Yeah, at least it didn't
Really?
feel that different. No, I don't think so.
Oh my god, weren't all your classmates? I'm like, oh, this must be a little genius for being 16 sitting next to me, and they're like 18, 19 years old, and I'm sure older too.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. It was an interesting experience. I definitely got the shock effect when they found out my age. So no, it's always fun.
So you were not even able to legally drink when you graduated.
No, the first time I actually had a drink was at Facebook. And I actually had to decline it because it was during I joined that orientation. I think I was 20 when I started at Facebook. And they offered Fridays, they do all hands. And back in the day, I don't know if they still do it, they literally give you beer. They have beer on tap and you grab it and you go sit for all hands when Zuckerberg talks to you. And they gave it to me. I'm like, I don't think I can drink this. Like there's no one checking my ID, of course, but I'm like, I don't want to get fired on my first day here. But so that was my experience.
Wow. Okay. So you really this interview is taking a whole different turn. I need all the details about your private life now. So you really were a kid when you started your very serious, successful career.
If you want another embarrassing story, this is what my first interview process looked like. So at Facebook, again, this is me graduating college. I had gotten Facebook because I had won some competition in school at Brown Champagne, which at high frequency trading. And that got me a job at an internship at one of the premier high frequency trading firms in Chicago. And that attracted Facebook.
Wait, they came to you?
They reached out to me to like send me to the hackathon. And the only reason I went to the hackathon was again, poor college student. They were offering free pizza and food. So I went to the hackathon and did well there. And that's kind of what got me into Facebook. During the interview process, I still remember this, going back to the drinking thing. For some reason, they also had beer and other stuff close by in the kitchen during lunch. So I was there. I finished 2 interviews. And then other people interviewing at the same time as me, they were all very excited and enamored. People from the Midwest coming. First of all, free lunch itself was great back then. And you're also offering free beer during the interview. They were all enamored. I go there with my chocolate milk that they also had. And I sat there drinking chocolate milk right before the interview started. I didn't realize the optics of that, but
Oh my god.
afterwards, I'm sure this made it into some sort of interview feedback for me during that time.
That is incredible. And I'm sure you getting the job at like 20, beating out, I'm sure 28-year-olds at that point. or even older. That is amazing. Okay, so talk to me because Facebook, I'm sure we've all seen the movie, and I've heard a lot of stories about Facebook. Tell me about working at Facebook at 20 years old, kind of from your perspective. I'm very curious.
It was really fun, honestly, for many reasons. Personally, like that was the first time I basically escaped Midwest, went to California, literally middle of nowhere, scoring growing around cornfields to California where I saw Priuses for the first time. So literally everything from landing to going to the office was a kind of a magical new experience for me. So I kind of fell in love with California and just kind of the tech scene in general over there. So I had worked really hard. Many days where I actually slept overnight at Facebook, kind of launched features,
Whoa.
and there was a lot of change back then where every 3 months or so, they were reorging their teams and consolidating just to make other startup listeners feel bad. One of the products I built was called Facebook Offers at the time. Within 1 month of launch, it got to $300 million run rate,
Oh.
but that was too slow. And they
Oh.
had to roll that into Facebook ads because that was getting to $1 billion run rate at the same time. And obviously now it's whoever knows how many billions. And that was kind of the pace of change that was happening back then. And it was really fun as like a tiny kid and new to my career,
Yeah.
sitting next to Zuckerberg, like 2 seats away, he used to come over and actually participate in UX design, like critique. So it's very low level stuff. So it's he was quite involved back then, and maybe he still is. I don't know, but that was super super fun and exciting.
Wow. Okay. So was that normal for people to just sleep at the office?
Not that normal, but it did happen. So the what pushed it was Android and iOS releases. They were pretty time based at the time, so you could get it through like once a month or so to App Store. Whereas the web app, you could just launch whenever. So some of those things caused time pressures to happen, where if you wanted your features to get in, you just had to kind of put the extra, burn the midnight oil.
Wow. Did they like throw crazy parties, invite speakers? Like, did you attend any of these things?
I did. There were a few fun ones. They had Cirque du Soleil come and perform on the campus once. That was really fun. And I believe that might have been related to the time when Facebook had 1 billion users. And the IPO happened. We did a little party for that one. But the year of the IPO, they had a really, really big Christmas party that was fun. They invited like Daft Punk and a bunch of others. They kind of went all out, and that was yeah, definitely one of those Silicon Valley TV show style parties.
How do you move on from that? Like working there when you're that young, don't you think then, oh, this must be what every company's like?
That's a good question. For me, I wasn't really that enamored by all the extra stuff. I genuinely just liked building. I like building, making an impact, and much to the I'm sure discomfort of my wife, like I really don't care for too many nice things, if you will, and I just care about basically making things and seeing them work. And that brings me joy. So that's how I make decisions is like how do I put myself in a situation where I can do even more and I can build even more. And that's what's been motivating me.
Wow. So how did you or when did you decide, let's move on to Rubric? Did they reach out to you? Did you apply for a role? How did that work?
That was also an interesting thing. So during my time at Facebook, one of Facebook acqui-hired a team into my team to kind of work on this offers product, the ads product. And it just so happens that person, Soham, he ended up being one of the co-founders of Rubrik. And then he's actually the one that pulled me in. He's like, hey, I joined this team. They're really cool. I think you should talk to them. And he kind of tricked me into leaving Facebook and joining Rubrik at the time.
Wow. Have you ever gone through a traditional interview process?
Oh, that was a traditional interview process as well. So, I
Okay.
mean, once you go through, I still had to interview with all the founders, the rest of the founders, but it probably was, I would say, easier back then, given there's only two other people to interview with.
So talk to me about being kind of the first engineering hire then and kind of what did you have to set up? How did, more of the team get hired? What did that all look like?
I think that's Rubrik is probably where I learned how to build while things are shifting under your feet constantly. And that is a skill set anyone joining an early stage startup is going to face. You're going to face that in different forms. from when there's nothing at all to when you have something and you're starting to scale revenues. They're all different challenges. But I've never not felt, as sad as it sounds, not felt like things are just falling apart constantly and you're building things to keep it all up. That's just how it feels. And Rubrik was a really, really clear cut example of that, where I wasn't as isolated from everything else going on like I was at Facebook. So in the beginning days, literally just the code you write, you couldn't send it anywhere. So you write code and you host this code in like a repository, GitHub, for example, and that didn't exist. So we had to set that up. And then reviewing code didn't exist because it was like two people writing code back then. They didn't bother reviewing. So I had to set that up and I pulled over what we set up at Facebook for that. And then it was just whatever was needed, right? So we formed a plan around this is what the product should look like in a year and broke it down into what needs to be built and then just started crossing things off the list.
Wow. So was that the first time you had to hire personally for like a team, or had you hired people previously?
I had hired people at Facebook. So I started this team called Neighborhoods. That was a bit different. So I kind of led an effort to hire from within Facebook. I stole a lot of tech leads to the project. But then, obviously Facebook, that was a hyper growth time. I was probably on 100 interviews over my time there at Facebook
Okay.
and probably close to 300 at my time at Rubrik. So literally the first week I joined Rubrik, I had to interview 5 people. That was and tell them about obviously how great Rubrik is to convince them to join.
That's amazing. You're like, I've been here a day, 3 hours.
I think I was still wearing my Facebook t-shirt. I One of the co-founders had to yell at me after a while, but I think I showed up to interviews in my Facebook t-shirt for most of them.
That's so funny. I'm sure you were still one of I used to work at a company where this kid was an account executive and he kept forgetting he had switched jobs. So he kept picking up the phone saying his previous company's name. And then just every time we all died because we had an open floor plan and we heard it and literally like almost peed our pants. And I'm like, that is no longer where you work. And he'd be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I just picture that. You being like in your Facebook get up, being like, I don't work here anymore.
Yeah, pretty much.
So obviously Facebook, it's bigger than life. What's the transition like from all those benefits, the parties and sleeping at the office? I don't know, maybe at Rubik you also slept at the office. What was the difference and how did you feel about that?
I think this is one of the nice things about making those drastic decisions young, of giving up good benefits, because you honestly don't use a lot of the benefits anyway, apart from the food and things like I didn't start my 401k. I probably should have,
Yeah.
but that was silly. Guys, don't do it if you're listening, just start it.
Immediately.
And healthcare wasn't really an issue. And pretty much every benefit I wasn't really using, to be honest. The main thing I did miss was they gave free laundry services back then.
Wow.
That was really nice. But that was the only thing I really missed going to Rubrik. I kid you not, the first day, the founders realized they were hiring people from Facebook and Google and they were used to free food. He made me go buy cereal for the morning because I was used to my chef created waffles and fresh fruits at Facebook. But I'm like, where's the breakfast? He's like, here's some money. Go to the Safeway next door and you can get yourself something. So that was my experience. So as long as I had that, I was fine.
That's hilarious. Yeah, cereal's not quite the same as chef made waffles, but
Yeah.
it'll do in a pinch. I will say we have cereal here in the office and it's very popular.
See? Don't diss cereal.
All right. So you were at Rubrik for 4.5 years before you moved to Lightspeed Venture Partners, which is very different. I mean, you can
Mhm.
tell me maybe it's not as different as I think it is now. Talk to me about the decision to kind of make that big of a switch and also to leave Rubrik.
It was probably the most drastic switch of my time. Becoming a manager and a lead was kind of a natural path, but basically working my way up to the top and kind of starting again in a completely different field, it's just a lot of shocks. I think one, the skill sets that made you really good at engineering are almost completely useless in the venture world, where the venture world actually looks a lot more like sales. You're building a pipeline of companies and people you're talking to. And unlike sales, there's really not good pipelining you can do. You just have to play the long game and really get a lot of network building you end up setting up that pays off eventually, which you then pipeline. So there's a lot of work you put in just sourcing and diligence that was just doesn't exist in engineering. But then the other part that makes it really difficult is actually picking between all of them. So for a place like Lightspeed, since they are a top 10 firm, like they pretty much end up seeing most of the deals that are worth seeing. There's always exceptions. I mean, it's still hard to source, but they pretty much do. So then the hard part becomes like, how do you actually know if it's good or not? And how do you win the deal? How do you actually win over the founder? And that's where my founding experience was really helpful. So joining early as a engineer, I was still early enough that basically was and saw a lot of the challenges the founders faced. And when you feel it and what you're feeling every day and working on it, VCs that haven't actually done it themselves, like they just can't articulate it. I mean, you probably heard things from a VC at some point. Oh yeah, just hire a new VP of sales. That'll solve all your problems. Just hire X and Y. Like they'll offer suggestions, but you really need to kind of double click into what's actually happening and customize your suggestions to actually help them. And I think that was something I was able to do, which helped a lot. And what I was able to learn is also just how to be useful on a board, how to actually identify companies and get to the heart of the matter in many different spaces, and a lot more on the business side. So, how do you actually read these numbers and understand what's going on with the business without talking to anyone, which is very, very hard, by the way, in early stage. But those are all the things I kind of had to learn on the job. And I think just getting comfortable with the discomfort was a really, really big skill I had to learn there.
So did the job find you or did you go actively looking for that job?
No, the job found me. I was actually fundraising for a startup and a few other ideas. And the owner of Lightspeed at the time basically told me, like, hey, I don't think your ideas are any good, but the way you're thinking is good. Why don't you come join as an investor for a while and see if you'll like it? That was more or less how the conversation went.
Oh my god.
And then it was like a short interview process, and that's what happened.
Wait, what was the idea? Do you remember?
I do. I have to agree. I think it probably wasn't venture scale ideas. There was a few ideas at the time. I think there was one around DevOps. DevOps, you run to the situation where you're running a lot of these scripts last mile. And it was around making it easier to manage those scripts and run them and give people access to production. You'd be laughing, but the joke about IT is very true. In a lot of instances for DevOps issues in production, you do just restart the service and it kind of solves a lot of things. But the time it takes to restart it for many companies is just really long. So we were about making that script easier to create, manage, run. I think that did become a company. I forgot the name of the company. So that was one of it. The other one was around like security. But I think they were all kind of in the realm of it makes sense, but not quite the path towards billions of dollars.
They were good ideas, not the Eve kind of good idea, but good ideas.
Not the Eve kind, yes.
That's amazing. All right. So then they were like, come work here. Was there any hesitation? Because you were, I feel like, really working towards something. And this feels like you took a left turn suddenly.
Yeah, there was. I took 3 months to decide, actually. I was basically pondering whether it is a time to, I think it was the same question, build or learn. Both of them motivates me. And the learning bucket kind of won for me, which I'm glad it did. The amount of learning I kind of went through in my tenure there was just unparalleled and a very different kind than what I'm doing as a founder. It's all different, but it helps me. Like right now for fundraising, I know exactly what the other side is thinking, which also hurts me because I also know I'm not quite as crazy and ambitious potentially, maybe with how I would be if I didn't know anything. So there's some of that. But at the same time, it does help. And you understand what excellence looks like across many different examples. And innately, my brain just doesn't want to chase anything less than that. So if we're performing any less than what I've pattern matched other excellent companies to do, it just causes me physical pain, it feels like. And we have to fix it. That's kind of the benefits you get from that type of pattern matching.
That's amazing. So from Lightspeed, you then went on to create Eve. Did you start the company while you were still working there? What did that process look like?
No, so some people I used to work with at Rubrik were leaving and they were asking me and talking to me about ideas and ideations. And I just really enjoyed working with them. So Matt, my co-founder, and I worked pretty closely at Rubrik as well. And I was an investor. I was trying to actually give him money to start something initially. And it just kind of evolved into other conversations. But I had left Lightspeed at the time under a pretty simple premise, which you'll laugh now. But back in 2020, we started a company with a very simple thesis that we believe in the future, every company will be an AI company. We didn't know how right we were going to be, of course.
Very
But
right.
that was the premise. And we were working on NLP models. So, how do you customize these NLP models for data extraction purposes? For example, like resumes, picking out names, contracts. And the contracts part is kind of what led us down the legal eventually and gave birth to Eve.
So I always love hearing how people start successful companies. How kind of soon into the process did you make your first few hires? When did you start fundraising? Talk to me about the whole process.
This is a pretty interesting experience because it almost feels like we built two startups here. One before, like we pivoted into Eve from when we started. So the time there was we were chasing again, like I mentioned, these document extraction use cases. And there we had a clear idea. We knew who the ICP was. We had a pipeline of customers built that we were going to build for. And I had hired pretty much like before the funding even hit the bank. So I think I hired 2 or 3 people already by that point, and we grew to about a team of 10 or 12 while we were still figuring things out. The biggest challenge we ran into is, like, we actually had a lot of customers. We had 1,000 users creating AI products with at the time, it was called Butler Labs. The challenge we had was we had to find ways of getting the ACVs to be much higher because we had a lot of people paying on the go, and our goal was to kinda convert them into enterprise contracts, and for that, we just had to go much deeper and build a pretty different product than what we thought we needed to build. And that was kind of the evolution iteration that led to Eve. As people call it, it was a 3-year overnight success. Is That's kind of what it takes sometimes to be on the right path.
Eve is a huge success. You guys had an incredible Series B round. Can you talk a little bit about that?
We raised north of 100 million at a billion-dollar valuation,
Unreal.
and largely happened thanks to the hard work the team has been doing. What I've been talking about, where you're building as things are shifting under you, cannot be understated. We grew from 13 people a year ago to more than 200 now. And as you mentioned, Bets has been great. I'll give you guys a shout out. But
Thank you.
you've hired 40 go to market engineers for us while we were ramping up sales quite aggressively. And on top of that, just doing all the work needed to keep everyone productive. And I believe vast majority of sales completely destroyed their quotas. I think 2x their quotas, most of them. And that was a lot had to go to make that happen. Hard work by everyone that joined, hard work by the people that were already here to change processes constantly as the team grew and create some semblance of normality in running the business and keeping up with customers and going through renewals. And there was a lot of firsts you had to tackle as a team. So doing that was probably the most challenging part. But what was very clear is the product market fit was incredibly strong. We were more or less like closing every single pilot we were starting, and it was markedly better than competitors in a way that was like 10x better. So it was kind of like everything you'd want with a fast moving market and a really good team and really good customers that led to that explosive growth.
So, with that rapid growth, obviously, it's your company. You want to make sure company culture is good, especially with the companies you came from and the successes there. How did you kind of keep that in mind as you were hiring and obviously using agencies to help hire?
I think this is a really critical thing to get right because you need culture, you also need capability and talent in the team in the right place. There's a few things that I look for. Number one, which I think is intent, you just can't live without it as a startup. You want people to have a high level of agency and urgency. That's a given and a must have. The other things we built around our cultural tenets. So we have a cultural tenet called Eve as well. The E stands for excellence, the V, visionary innovation, and the other E, elevate. And we effectively try to ensure that the early people we hire mirror those principles. So, what does that really mean and look like in practice? If you are joining as an early sales rep, that's a very, very different role being the first rep, even the fifth rep. It's pretty different. The first rep you hire, both they know, and I think you, as the hiring manager, know that the quotas are kind of made up You're trying to figure it out. You're hoping for the best. You have very limited signals. You have to project out what's going to happen. So at that point, really the thing you look for the most is tenacity. What are the times in the past experience where things looked hopeless and they still found a way through? That tells you a lot about how they work. Like it tells you about their hunger, their humility in learning and iterating. It tells you about their optimism. I really do think you have to be optimistic to be a really strong sales rep because you go through a lot of ups and downs. It's inevitable in your career. And that question I like a lot. That's how I kind of hired my early people, right? Like they basically demonstrated those properties really, really well. And then I spent a lot of time just developing them. I think it's one of those things where I do typically latch on and I give people a lot of responsibility and I do what I can to back them up to perform. And that can be one-on-one coaching, hiring strong managers they respect to help them out, or any and all of the above. And that was really critical because of the rate we were growing. We really needed the early people to hire the next wave. That is kind of how I've thought about setting the culture because it's you can talk about all of these cultural tenets, just like I said, Eve is a cultural tenant, but eventually it works itself in like how do people operate when you're not there? How do they themselves think and how do they make decisions? And once you have a critical mass of them, people will just suss it out. People are really, really sharp with these things.
So the hires are obviously vital and the right hires are vital. How did you come to the decision to work I mean, obviously with Beth, but like with a recruiting company versus kind of handling it all internally? Those are some questions I get a lot from people I talk to. Like, how do I decide to do it myself or work with you guys?
For us, it was a combination of factors. I think one is just the speed at which we're growing. We literally didn't have time to set up a strong sourcing function internally. The second thing is recommendations. Like we found bets via a friend of mine who referred them over, and that's a really important part of how I evaluate who to work with because that's what I would do if I'm hired to begin with as well. Is do a bit of back channeling, find out how they actually perform before hiring them and then finally, it's seeing the performance. So seeing how you actually do and how you iterate. And that iteration process and the thought process behind it actually builds a lot of confidence. And that was something I enjoyed working with. Megan is who we work with on our side at Bets, has kind of demonstrated that really, really well.
I know she even came to the sales kickoff and she was so excited. She told us all about it. And yeah, absolutely loved it and seeing everyone kind of there and thriving. Obviously, Eve is an incredible company. You guys are incredibly successful. So for her to get to be there, she was very honored and humbled.
We were happy to invite her.
Yeah, she loved it. So, obviously, much bigger company now. If someone is listening to this podcast and is like, "I wanna work there," that all sounds absolutely amazing. What are some kind of candidate green flags? What can they do to stand out and get in front of you or the specific hiring manager?
I mean, at this point, I think it's demonstrating excellence at something. So either past excellence or really indicate a strong sense of future excellence. Because the way we hire any rep is like we want to see can they be our most strategic rep in the future? We need to see that in their capabilities, no matter which role they start from. We ask that from our SDRs to our entry level AEs to even our strat AEs. We're looking at can they go chase the next $10 million deal? That is kind of the way we're thinking. And if you can demonstrate how you bring that to the table and how you brought that in the past, that helps a lot. But in general, I think it breaks down to showing some level of innate hunger and ambition to do more, better yourself, better the company. And it comes down to some level of humility, learning from past mistakes and thinking critically and understanding why you actually lose deals and how to get to the point where you never lose is easier to control than always win sometimes. That's something you can show. And eventually, yeah, just being a kind person, having heart and actually being part of a team and growing.
That's really nice. So, do you remember kinda an interview maybe that you were a part of where you saw someone and thought they have it being what kind of Eve needs to build? And do you kind of remember kinda in what moment that was that made you realize that or what they did?
I think I remember all of them actually.
Wow.
Pretty much everyone we did hire showed that in some way, shape, or form. Maybe I could talk about one of our first reps we hired. I don't know if you sent her to us. Mercedes was the first rep that we hired. And I remember at the time, I think she had a similar background to me where she was like a triple major and was in biology or something. I think a bio major and I forgot the other degree, but she had two degrees graduating college and then somehow ended up in sales. And just she showed tenacity and kind of learning the skill and growing and really blowing her numbers out of the water. And she demonstrated a lot of those properties that I was just describing before. And I remember that pretty well for many reasons. One, I was supposed to be on vacation, my first vacation at Rubrik, and I think I ended up spending the whole thing negotiating a deal and interviewing employees during the whole thing. But I remember that call quite well, and I remember when she was kind of talking about how she was demonstrating those properties.
That's really nice, and we don't like to, name names here, but do you remember kinda any candidates you interviewed and you're like, "No, this is an absolute no," and do you remember why you felt that?
I hate to say this. I hope no one takes it the wrong way, but I don't remember the nose. I wipe it out of my memory as quickly as possible and move on. This is just something I built in myself. I try to forget bad memories and just learn from it and go on. Not that interviewing them are bad memories, of course, but that's just kind of how I operate. But in general, like the main things that shows it are the most obvious red flags are when people aren't able to reflect on what actually happened. So if they lost a deal or won a deal and they can't pinpoint what was the process and what was required to actually get that over the finish line, that shows me not really thinking about sales as an art, not you're just found something that works and you're using it. So I think that's like the most common source of red flags. The other one that surprisingly happens, interestingly enough, with like strong candidates is just ego. There's a difference between really believing in yourself and being confident to being overconfident. And drawing that line is really important to do right. So I think that's another really common one of red flags. But eventually, like, I think showing strong signs of discovery is such a difficult skill set that you could always keep improving. But the best candidates demonstrate that in even the questions they ask during the interview process. So there's a lot that you could be doing, even though the interviewer is not asking you questions that actually can positively highlight you as a candidate.
I love it, and I'm sure some people who wanna interview at Eve are listening to this and, like, taking notes. We actually received an email this week where someone had listened to one of our founders talk about kinda process and how he started the company, and he emailed saying, "I'm interviewing at the company and I used your podcast. Thank you so much for the prep," and, we really loved hearing that, and I'm like,
That's
"Yes,
amazing.
use it, of course." I do the same, right? When you're going into a company, you want to hear what the founder thinks and their vision because I feel like with most things in life, it's a two-way street. You have to want to hire them, but they also have to want to work for you. And I always just say that and remind candidates of that. You don't just want to get hired, you also want to make sure you want to get hired. So you're not too just competitive with winning. But that's amazing. I know we're pretty much at time. So my last question to you is for anyone looking at your career, which is incredibly impressive, and also you started it very young, which is even more impressive. What can you tell them to kinda inspire them or help get them where you are?
I think you control the inputs and not always the outputs. So the best thing you can do is really figure out what you can change in your day-to-day operations and then make some critical decisions really thoughtfully. Picking a new company is a very important decision. And chances are, if the company does better, you will also do better because that naturally comes with more challenges, more opportunities, what have you. So that is the main thing. Control how you work and do the best you can in any role. And if you have to move, figure out what the next opportunity is that gives you the best chance of actually fulfilling that growth. And that's kind of how I've decided. So right now, people joining Eve are really, really benefiting from obviously the fast growth Eve is having, but also being exposed to the industry. We're at the frontier of AI and we're constantly even changing how sales is done and how sales operates by using these AI tools, by doing changing out processes to operate even faster so we can kind of show up to every single meet being way more prepared than anyone else and what that means for all the different phases of sales. These are questions we're asking ourselves every day. I would recommend you kind of think about what gives you the best chance of improving yourself from a capabilities perspective and from a outcome perspective, like, will happen and follow the more you do that.
Thank you. I know I said that was the last question, but one more quick one. If I were to do a follow-up interview in 5 years, Jay, where would you be? What would you be doing?
Hopefully still Eve. I mean, we have a lot more we can build. I mean, we've just barely scratched the surface. The really, really exciting part of the future is people are learning how to work in the world where suddenly doing tasks and even intelligence is becoming a commodity. That's both exciting and really scary. People are, I think, right now freaked out about it. But what we are seeing is no jobs are getting replaced yet, at least from what we can see, even with lawyers, where you would think it's literally all text and LLMs are really good at text. It's still not happening, and I don't really see it happening because we live in a competitive industry. Once someone has access to tools, everyone else gets access to the same tools. Thankfully, that's the case. Hopefully, it stays the case. And as a result, we're moving towards an economy where we're trying to figure out how do we use these tokens really and make the most use out of it. And legal is 3 to 4% of GDP in the United States. And there's a lot of things that require legal help that today no one is even thinking about. So we have a lot of ambitious plans ahead, and we've barely started.
I love it. Thank you so much, Jay. Thank you for answering all my questions and coming on Beyond the Hire. And thank you, everyone, for listening.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sandra, for having me on. Appreciate it.